And House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi rumored plan for a trip to Taiwan has infuriated China and left the White House with a serious geopolitical headache. Now, how big a problem is this? China is now warning of serious consequences if Ms. Pelosi was to proceed with her visit. Second in line to the presidency, Mrs. Pelosi would be the highest-ranking U.S. politician to travel to the island since 1997. China sees self-ruled Taiwan as a breakaway province that must become a part of that country. Beijing has not ruled out the possible use of force to achieve this. And Global Affairs analyst Calvin Dack joins me from Washington, D.C. to discuss this. Good to have you join us.
Good to be here.
Now, this report of this trip is coming at a time where there is an increasing need for America to show support for Taiwan, but also at a time where there is the Sino-American relations are at an all-time low, and there is also tension in that region. So one is wondering, what does Nancy Pelosi really hope to achieve with this, and if there is a broader American strategy here when it comes to this trip?
I think what Speaker Pelosi is trying to accomplish is to show support for democracy in Taiwan. And I think this is particularly important because everyone knows, in the back or front of some people's minds, that people are thinking about Ukraine and if Xi Jinping will try to encroach as Putin did. But now when you talk about, an American strategy, maybe that is what is behind all of this. The only problem is that it doesn't appear that the White House is on board with the trip. So it could be the House of Representatives' congressional strategy, the White House's strategy, or both.
And I think in recent months, President Biden did say that if the United States, that the United States will defend Taiwan if it was attacked. But at the moment, the President Biden and some national security officials are trying to convince Nancy Pelosi not to make the trip. Why do you think there is a change in tone from President Biden, and what exactly is at stake here?
Well, I think the change in tone is basically that with the economic situation here in the United States and around the world, Joe Biden doesn't want to do anything that's going to exacerbate tensions with China that could affect us economically, nor do they want China to go closer to Russia in this time where, the U.S. and other Western powers are trying to stop the Russian invasion in the Ukraine. Now, I also will say this. One of the things about our system here that I like is that Congress is a complete independent branch of government. And even though I want the White House and Congress to be on the same page, I like the fact that if Nancy Pelosi decides to go, there's nothing that the White House can do. And I think that's healthy for our democracy.
And surprisingly, we're seeing some members of the Republican Party support Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. For example, Mark Esper supports this trip. And there was a statement recently by former National Security Advisor to President Trump, John Bolton. And he says that America will conduct its foreign policy the way America wants to conduct its foreign policy. He thinks that Nancy Pelosi should make the trip. But shouldn't there be a worry about the Chinese rhetoric, which could include military action, we understand?
Well, I actually think that the threats of military action make the trip more plausible. But let's keep in mind, there's now scheduled a call between Xi Jinping and Biden for Thursday, where we know this will come up. If this trip is somehow, which isn't even official yet, if it is canceled, what will that say? Will that say that the U.S. gave in to pressure from China or military threats? That's not a good look for U.S. security. And I do think that some people on the Republican side who are thinking about this from a foreign policy angle are correct, that they want to show China that China can't dictate U.S. foreign policy. Though I would be skeptical and take with a grain of salt anything that Republicans say about Nancy's trip ahead of the midterms, because anything that can point out a disagreement among the Democrats between the House of Representatives and the White House helps them make the case that Republicans are better for foreign policy. So take it with a grain of salt.
But just in general, when you look at over the years, American stance on Taiwan and China, and how often America has had to walk back some statements it makes about China. Even that statement that President Biden made about supporting or coming to Taiwan's aid if it were attacked, was also retracted by the White House. Do you think that this sort of highlights the confusion or the sense of confusion in America about the foreign policy towards China and Taiwan?
I don't really think that it causes confusion here. What it does do is reminds us that words have consequences, and regardless of what we think of China's foreign policy, we know that a move by China could seriously affect our economy here. So I think that's what you're saying. Now, when it comes to the ambiguity of the U.S. position toward Taiwan, it's intentionally ambiguous, and because they want to keep their options open. But I think that if Biden or anyone else is going to have these strong words, they got to be prepared for the consequences, which I don't think we are yet.
And we'll see if the U.S. is willing to put its reputation at stake here, because that's what many foreign policy analysts think will happen if Nancy Pelosi do not make that trip. Thank you so much for talking to us, global affairs analyst Calvin Dark.
Thank you.